I never thought I'd be the kind of person who lies about her own name. But when your mother writes love stories for a living and the whole world thinks you're lucky, you learn how to disappear. They don't know the truth. How her words tore our family apart. How I grew up watching her write about love she didn't believe in. When the scandal hit, I ran, traded my name for a quieter one, Nao Aihara, and promised myself I'd stay invisible. No friends, no love, no one finding out who I really am. But then I met him, the boy who looked right through my lies, and the one who made me wish I could tell the truth. If I had known how much they'd change everything, I would have never stepped foot in that school. The train windows were fogged over, just a soft breath of autumn pressing against the glass. I wiped a corner with my sleeve, enough to see the fields thinning into buildings, the countryside folding itself into something more familiar. Iron gates, tiled rooftops, dormitories rising like quiet promises. Aoyama Countryside Academy. It looked exactly the way I imagined it would. Polite, a little distant. The kind of place that kept its secrets tucked beneath pressed uniforms and scheduled quiet hours. The air smelled of cedar and something floral. Faint, probably planted near the entrance to impress visitors. I clutched my student ID a little tighter. Nao Aihara. The name still didn't sit right. Not when I said it, not when anyone else did. It felt borrowed, like a name stitched hastily onto a girl I wasn't sure how to be. Aihara, not Fujimura. No one would say that name here. Not unless they'd read the news, or the magazines, or the comments under those articles that didn't know where fiction ended and a woman's real life began. I stepped through the main gate, letting its shadow pass over my shoulder. That was supposed to be symbolic, right? Stepping over thresholds, leaving something behind. But shame doesn't stay in the past. It clings quietly like smoke in your favorite sweater. The campus was lovely in that old money kind of way. Traditional buildings, sliding windows, pine trees trimmed like they were holding their breath. Students passed by in blazers and skirts, their voices soft like piano notes carried by wind. No one noticed me. Not yet. That was the point. I kept my expression neutral, my posture composed. Not too stiff, not too casual. The art of being invisible isn't about hiding. It's about blending in so completely that people's eyes just slide right off you. Inside the administration office, the woman at the desk smiled politely. She glanced at my transfer documents, then handed me my dorm key. Her nails were pale pink. "Room 3B, she said. "You're the last to arrive this semester." I nodded, thanked her, in a voice I barely recognized. She didn't look twice. Good. Out in the hallway, I caught pieces of conversation, a group of girls near the lockers whispering over a folded tabloid. I didn't even know she had a daughter, right? They kept her out of the spotlight for years. But that book, my mom said it was practically soft porn. No wonder she's in hiding now. The laugh that followed was sharp. I didn't stop walking, didn't flinch, didn't let them see me. Maybe they weren't talking about me. Maybe. My dorm room was smaller than I expected, but clean. Bright, pale curtains, a narrow bed that creaked when I sat down. I set my suitcase beside it, still closed. Outside, the bell rang for afternoon classes. A bird took off from a branch outside my window, wings catching sunlight before disappearing. I breathed. In. Out. The kind of breath you take when you have to convince yourself you're allowed to be here. My phone buzzed, a message from my aunt. Something short, something kind. "Let me know when you've settled. You've got this." I didn't reply. Instead, I pulled my jacket tighter and lay back on the mattress, staring at the cracks in the ceiling paint. Maybe no one would ask. Maybe they wouldn't notice the flinch when someone said my last name. Maybe the past could stay packed away, with my real ID card and the copies of my mother's novels I almost threw out. I could survive this. Stay invisible. Stay neutral. Never talk about the past. That was the plan. But even as I closed my eyes and tried to disappear into the quiet, I could still hear it. That ghost of a voice on television, that headline that wouldn't die. Acclaimed romance novelist Yumi Fujimura faces backlash after scandal with younger editor. I pressed my hands flat against my stomach to keep the ache down. I wasn't her. I wasn't my mother. And I wasn't here to be anyone's story. Not anymore. Orientation week passed in a blur of names I didn't remember and faces I didn't plan to. Every interaction felt like walking across thin glass. Careful, measured, rehearsed. I smiled the way you're supposed to when someone hands you a welcome packet. I nodded during the headmaster's speech, though the only thing I really remembered was the sound. That faint rustling of blazers and the soft tap of rain against tall windows. By the third day, I'd perfected it. The rhythm of polite avoidance. Sit near the back. Speak only when spoken to. Keep your voice even, your answers short. Still, people notice things. No matter how quiet you try to be, there's always someone watching a little too closely. It started in the literature building. Of course it did. The hallway smelled like old books and lemon cleaner, the kind that stings faintly in your nose. I had just left my first class, Modern Narratives in the Female Voice, when she appeared beside me. Short hair, glossy lips, eyes too sharp to be casual. "I like your boots," she said, matching my pace before I could find a way to escape. "Thanks." "They're not regulation." I looked down. She wasn't wrong. The heels were half a centimeter too high. "I didn't know." "You did," she said easily, smiling like it wasn't a threat. "But it's fine. The teachers only care if you make noise." I didn't answer. She studied me like I was a puzzle with one piece missing. "Are you new or just transfer new?" "Transfer." She nodded. I thought that was it. Then, "Now Ihara, right?" The pause before I said yeah was too long. Her smile curved, like she already knew the answer. "You wouldn't happen to be related to Yumi Fujimura, would you?" The air shifted. I felt it before I even reacted. That click in my stomach, the world narrowing in. "No," I said, too quickly. "Why would I be?" She tilted her head. "You kind of look like her, around the eyes and your voice." She didn't finish, but she didn't have to. "I've never read her books," I added. A lie, stupid and obvious. Her mouth twitched. "You should. They're messy, overwritten, kind of addictive." She shrugged. "Not really my thing, but I get why people are obsessed." We walked in silence until the hallway split. She peeled off to the right, lifted 2 fingers in a wave. "See you around, Fujimura." The sound of my real name, spoken so lightly like it wasn't a knife, stayed with me long after her footsteps disappeared. I didn't go back to my dorm. Not yet. Instead, I slipped into the small garden behind the language wing, the one no one used unless they were skipping class or hiding something. The stone bench was damp, but I sat anyway, fingers curling around the edge. Romance novels. Messy. Addictive. Not her thing. Not mine either. Not anymore. When I was younger, I used to sneak into my mother's office, pull her books off the shelf one by one, read them in the dark. My heart would race when the characters touched fingers or said something too honest. Back then, it felt like magic, the way people fell into each other like they'd been waiting their whole lives. Now, it just felt like a trick. Something constructed. Words stretched too far. Stories dressed up to make bad choices look like fate. I used to think my mother wrote love stories. But if they were real, why did they ruin everything? A breeze stirred the edge of my coat. I pulled it tighter. The quiet ache I'd buried rose like a tide. I wasn't angry. That would have been easier. I was just tired. Tired of the whispers. Tired of headlines. Tired of strangers thinking they knew me because they'd read a paperback with her name on it. I pressed my palm flat to the bench, grounding myself. Love isn't real. Not the way she wrote it. That's what I told myself. That's what I had to believe. Because if it was real, if it was honest and deep and worth chasing, then she'd chosen it over me. And I couldn't believe that. Not ever. So I stopped reading romance, stopped talking about my mother. And when people asked who I was, I said Naoi Hara, like I meant it. There were rules. I just hadn't written them down yet. Not on paper, that would have made them too real. But I repeated them like prayers, quiet commandments I whispered through my days. Don't stand out. Don't speak first. Don't get pulled in. Survival's easier when no one expects anything from you. If they don't look too close, they can't ask the wrong questions. If they don't care, they can't hurt you. It wasn't fear, I told myself. It was just staying clean, untouched. Like white shoes on the first day of school, right before the mud, right before someone steps too close. And yet, that morning, there was a paper pinned to the cafeteria bulletin board. The corner flapped where someone had tugged it loose. Literature Club welcomes new members. Fridays after class, room 12. Tea, books, quiet company. Someone had drawn a tiny teacup beside the word tea, steam curling into a heart. I stared at it too long. Not because I wanted to join, but because of that word. Quiet. It tricked me for a second. Made me feel like maybe someone else understood what it meant to sit beside a silence and not need to fill it. Then someone bumped my shoulder, a soft sorry, and the moment broke. By the time I reached class, I'd added another rule to the list. Don't follow softness. It never leads anywhere good. During lunch, I sat outside behind the art building, legs swinging, tray balanced on my knees. I watched clouds drift like slow thoughts. Students passed by in bursts of laughter that didn't quite reach me. Across the lawn, I saw her, the girl from the hallway, laughing now, surrounded by friends. The wind caught her hair, lifted it like something out of a magazine, all ease and belonging. She didn't look at me. Of course she didn't. I didn't even realize I was gripping my fork too tightly until it bent slightly in my hand. Back in class, Miss Tsukino handed out our reading list. Essays, short fiction, familiar names, Murakami, Tanizaki, Yumi Fujimura. No, not possible. But there it was, her name, tucked between the others, one of her older short stories, Salt in the Honey. I'd read it when I was 12, sneaking into her study. It didn't end with a kiss. It ended with silence, the kind that aches after it's gone. My hand shot up before I even thought about it. "Excuse me," I said, quieter than I meant to. "Can I opt out of one of the readings?" Miss Tsukino frowned. "That's not usually done." "Aihara-san, may I ask why?" The classroom went still. The girl from earlier sat 3 seats away. I felt her eyes before I saw them. "I just don't enjoy that author," I said. "Her work feels unrealistic." A pause. "Then you may substitute it," the teacher said. "I'll mark it for you." I thanked her, but it didn't feel like relief. It felt like exposure. Like I'd left a window open and someone had caught a glimpse inside. After class, someone tapped my shoulder. "I'm Minami," she said softly. "I help run the Lit Club." I waited. "We're still looking for new members," she said. "You seem like someone who might appreciate quiet books." Her voice was kind, not pushy, not curious, just open. "I'm not really good with clubs," I said. "That's okay," she smiled. "We don't really do much, mostly just read and drink too much tea." I gave her my practiced smile. "Maybe another time." She smiled back. Hers reached her eyes. "Okay, just thought I'd ask." As she walked away, I felt a pinch I couldn't name. Guilt, maybe, or loneliness. That night, back in my room, I finally wrote the rules down, in small, neat handwriting, like daring them to become real. 1. Be polite. 2. Stay quiet. 3. Don't tell anyone who you are. 4. Don't read what she wrote. 5. Don't join things. 6. Don't believe in softness. 7. Don't believe in love. I closed the notebook and slid it under my pillow. The way people hide diaries or letters, they're not ready to burn. Outside, it was raining again. Thin, steady. The kind that leaves no puddles, only a shimmer on the pavement. Like the world was trying to rinse itself clean. But some things don't wash away. Some things you just keep carrying, even after you've promised not to. There's something about being the girl who doesn't smile. It makes people look twice. Like you're a puzzle missing the last piece. I saw it in the sideways glances, the quiet whispers just out of earshot. And in the way Haru's eyes found me across the classroom, like I was a stray note in a familiar song. He had that kind of charm that felt easy, a grin that spilled over everything like sunlight, careless and warm. And I could tell he was trying to draw me out, his words weaving like a net. Light, teasing, persistent. "You must be new," he said one afternoon, leaning against the edge of a desk, casual but confident. The kind of tone that sounded like a question and a statement at the same time. I didn't look at him. I wasn't ready to be part of anyone's story yet, not even someone who smiled like he meant it. Instead, I watched him. The way his eyes flicked away when I held his gaze too long, the quiet hope hiding behind his easy words. "Why so serious?" he asked once, his voice soft, like he was sharing a secret with the air between us. I wanted to tell him it wasn't seriousness. It was something else, a quiet wariness. Because being seen isn't always a gift. Sometimes it's a risk. So I kept my lips pressed tight and my eyes steady, perfecting the art of unreadability. Still, I noticed the way people whispered. "Who is she?" they'd say, like I was a chapter in a book they weren't allowed to open. I wondered if they thought my silence was an invitation or a warning. Sometimes Haru would smile at me, one of those soft ones, the kind that reached his eyes and made the whole room feel lighter. But I never smiled back, not because I didn't want to, but because I didn't know how to let my guard down without losing myself. It was easier to be a ghost, to drift through the hallways and classrooms, slipping between conversations and laughter. Easier to keep the walls up. But even ghosts can be noticed. And sometimes, cracks only wait for the right light to find them. The novel's cover caught my eye before the title did. It was lying on the floor near my desk, the spine bent, the edges soft from being handled too much. It was my mother's latest book, the one everyone was still talking about, the one that haunted every room I walked into, even when no one said her name out loud. I picked it up, and it felt heavier than it should have, like holding a piece of a past I wasn't ready to claim. It smelled faintly of jasmine and old paper, the scent of home and heartbreak tangled together. My fingers traced the embossed title. The words were hers. But the silence between them, that belonged to me. I remembered sneaking into her study as a kid, reading her drafts when she wasn't home. Her worlds were loud, messy, full of emotions I didn't yet understand. And standing there, holding that book, I almost dropped it, like it might burn me if I held on too long. The impulse to throw it away was strong, but I didn't. I sat on the edge of my bed, the book resting on my lap, and let the quiet swell between us. Outside, the campus hummed softly, the sound barely slipping through the window. I looked at the author photo, her smile so effortless, her eyes so much like mine, except she looked lighter, like she didn't carry all this weight. I wanted to close the book, to shove the stories and the scandal back into the dark. But I couldn't. Not yet. Maybe this book wasn't just a burden. Maybe it was a mirror, fractured and blurred, but still reflecting something I needed to face. I pressed my palm to the cover, feeling the smoothness beneath it, and for the first time in a long while, I wondered what it would be like to open it. Not just the book, but myself. Outside, rain started to fall, light and steady, tapping against the glass. And I realized, some things you don't wash away. You just learn to live with them. Maybe even learn to read between the lines. The library was quiet, too quiet, like the world was holding its breath in the dust and sunlight. I moved between the shelves, trying to disappear into the silence. Old paper, ink, comfort. The kind that makes you feel like the world forgot about you for a while. That's when I saw him. Rei Takahashi. He leaned against a shelf, half reading, half somewhere else. And when he looked at me, it wasn't curiosity. It was recognition, like he saw the weight I was carrying, and didn't need to ask what it was. Our eyes met, and for a second, everything blurred. The books, the light, the noise of the world outside. "You're new here," he said quietly. "Yes," I whispered back, like any louder and the moment might shatter. He nodded, slow and knowing. Most people don't want to be seen. Not really. I didn't know how to answer that, because maybe he was right. Maybe I didn't. He stepped a little closer, not too much, just enough that his voice softened between us. "Sometimes," he said, "the people who seem invisible are the ones carrying the heaviest stories." Something in me flickered, a feeling I hadn't let myself feel in a long time. I wanted to believe him, to let my walls crack just a little. But fear has a way of keeping its promises. Before I could say anything, he smiled. Small, gentle, understanding. "If you ever want to talk," he said, "or just not be invisible, I'm around." And just like that, he was gone, melted back into the rows of books. I stood there, holding my own book tighter, not because of its weight, but because of what it now meant. The possibility that maybe someone could see me, not for the scandal or the name I carried, but for the girl who was still learning how to exist in her own skin. The rain outside kept its rhythm against the window, soft, steady, and somewhere deep inside, I felt a shift, like maybe this was the start of something I wasn't ready for, but was starting to want. I didn't mean to overhear them. The library was supposed to be my refuge, a place to disappear into pages. But as I passed by the courtyard, I caught voices. Light, teasing, familiar, and Haru's was right there among them. He was reading aloud. A poem, I think. The words rolled off his tongue like it was nothing. Easy, playful. But between the lines, I heard something else. A pause. A softness. Something real. "And even paper hearts can bleed," he said, his voice dropping, like it wasn't meant for anyone but the wind. I froze, leaning against the stone wall, listening to the edges of his voice unravel. This wasn't the same Haru, not the flirt, not the performer. This was someone else, someone honest, if only for a heartbeat. And I felt something stir, a small, impossible thing. The want to step closer, to ask, to understand. But old rules whispered in my ear, don't get involved, don't trust softness. Still, the poem lingered in the air like a secret, and I wondered what it would be like to be seen, not for the scars, but for what lived between them. Then laughter broke the spell. Haru smiled again, bright, easy, practiced. The performance was back, but now I knew better. Maybe he and I weren't that different after all. Both of us carrying our own paper hearts, folding them carefully, afraid of letting anyone too close. That night, the world outside my window fell quiet again. I sat at my desk, the glow from my laptop soft against the dark, fingers hovering over the keyboard. And all I could think about was that poem, not the voice that performed it, but the tenderness hidden underneath, like a secret meant just for me. I don't really know why I ended up here, on this small, hidden corner of the school's online forum. Maybe it was the safety of being unseen, or maybe it was that stubborn, quiet hope that someone, anyone, might hear the half-truths I couldn't say out loud. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, slow and hesitant, tracing the edge of something fragile before I folded it closed again. Open quote, your words feel like the spaces between breaths, soft, honest, and something I didn't expect to find here. Close quote. I stared at the message for too long before finally pressing post. The words slipped into the digital night, small and trembling. There was a strange comfort in that little act, reaching out without being seen. It felt like letting a secret drift on the wind, hoping it might land somewhere safe. I stayed up longer than I should have, waiting for any sign that someone had read it, that maybe Haru had read it. And then, a notification, a reply. Just a few words, playful but warm. Open quote, guess the secret poet might have more to say. Close quote. My chest tightened, half panic, half excitement. I closed the laptop gently, the glow fading, but inside, something shifted. The walls I'd built around myself, the ones I thought were unbreakable, trembled just a little. Maybe connection didn't always mean exposure. Maybe softness, sometimes, could stay. The classroom buzzed with lazy chatter, that soft, restless noise before the bell. I sat by the window, letting the light catch my hair, trying to disappear into the hum of voices. And then, his voice. Hey, did you guys see this? Haru stood near the center of the room, holding up his phone, grinning that easy grin that always seemed to draw the air toward him. Looks like I've got a secret poet out there. A ripple of laughter followed, light and easy, but I heard it, the shift in his tone. Beneath the teasing, there was something softer. He read my words aloud. Open quote, your words feel like the spaces between breaths, soft, honest, and something I didn't expect to find here. Close quote. The classroom went quiet. My heartbeat stumbled, loud in my ears. I looked down, pretending to write something, but I could feel his gaze sweep the room, felt it linger on me, even if just for a heartbeat. You know, Haru said, lowering his phone, it's not every day someone reaches out without wanting something back. Our eyes met for the briefest moment. My breath caught, and then he looked away. The whispers started up again, light, curious, harmless. But to me, they were knives. My walls didn't crumble, but they cracked. When the bell rang, we scattered. But that moment stayed with me, a secret shared in glances, suspended between fear and something that felt dangerously close to hope. Maybe showing your paper heart wasn't as dangerous as I thought. That afternoon, I found myself back at the screen. The cursor blinked, waiting. I typed a little more this time, a small thank you wrapped in words that felt almost too honest. I stared at them, wondering what it would mean if Haru saw through me, if anyone did. But then the fear came, the familiar kind that presses in until you can't breathe. My fingers moved on instinct, erasing line after line until the screen was empty again. Blank. Safe. Maybe courage is just the space between typing and deleting, the quiet battle no one sees. I closed the laptop and let the silence settle, listening to my own breath like it was the only thing holding me together. I wanted to be brave. I wanted to reach out. But not yet. Maybe one day, I told myself. For now, silence was safer. The next morning, the sunlight slipped through the blinds in thin golden stripes. The classroom felt lighter, louder. Too many voices, too much laughter that didn't mean anything. Then Haru again, holding up his phone with that same grin. Did anyone else see that comment on my poem last night? I swear, someone's messing with me. Laughter. Teasing. Someone joked, yeah, right, secret admirers? What is this, a rom-com? Haru chuckled. Maybe it's a prank. Secret admirer with more drama than guts. The words hit harder than I wanted them to. He scanned the room. His eyes brushed over mine for a moment. Sharp, curious, and then moved on. That was all it took. The small hope I'd held, fragile, foolish, snapped. To them, it was just a joke. A story to laugh about between classes. My tiny act of courage turned into a punchline. I smiled, pretending I didn't care. But inside, it burned. The silence screamed. And though Haru's grin stayed bright, I saw it. The shadow behind it. Maybe curiosity, maybe guilt, maybe something like mine. Still, I folded back into myself. Silence, I decided, was the safer language. Later, the classroom smelled faintly of chalk dust and paper, the scent of unspoken thoughts. We sat in a loose circle, poems scattered across the desks. Ray's voice cut through the stillness, calm, focused. Your voice, he said, it's familiar, like someone who's been writing longer than she lets on. I tried to laugh it off. Maybe I just read a lot. But his eyes didn't move. There was something in them, steady, searching. Reading's one thing, he said, but writing with that kind of weight, that kind of ease, that comes from somewhere. You don't have to tell me what story you're not sharing. Just don't bury it too deep. The room went quiet. I gripped my notebook a little tighter. My voice felt small when I finally said, I write what I know. Sometimes that's enough. Ray smiled, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Sometimes what we know is just the surface. I hope you'll share more when you're ready. His words lingered long after the conversation moved on. Outside, the light was fading, soft and forgiving. I stared down at my notebook, tracing the careful, guarded lines I'd written. And for the first time, I saw it. The reflection of a girl who wanted to be brave, but wasn't there yet. So the mask stayed. And his words, his gentle, impossible words, stayed too. The bell had already rung, sharp and final, sending a ripple of movement through the classroom. Most students slipped away, footsteps fading down the hall. But Ray stayed. His gaze found me, steady and unshaking. The quiet between us felt heavy, thick, like the air right before a storm, and I knew this wasn't going to be another casual exchange. He closed the door softly, leaning against the frame as if trying to make the space smaller, more intimate. Now, he said, voice low but deliberate, your writing, it doesn't read like a beginner's. It's too polished, too precise, almost trained. I'm curious, what are you hiding? It wasn't gentle curiosity. It was a challenge, a probe aimed straight at the walls I'd built. My pulse quickened. The instinct to protect myself flared, a warning light. I looked down at my hands, tracing the faint lines of a poem I hadn't meant to reread, holding my notebook like a shield. Maybe I'm just careful with my words, I said, steady but guarded, trying to sound casual. I wanted to let the moment slip by, unnoticed. But his eyes didn't move. They held mine, unwavering. There's a difference between careful and rehearsed, he said, stepping closer, lowering his voice further. It's like you're hiding behind the writing, not just using it to express yourself. That's what makes me wonder, who are you really? The question hung in the air, raw and exposed. I wanted to answer, to explain the fractured pieces of me, the reasons I lived behind masks. But the words caught in my throat, tangled in fear and memory. Instead, I forced a small, tight smile. I'm just me, I whispered. The lie tasted bitter, hollow even to my own ears. Rai's expression softened, suspicion melting into concern. You don't have to tell me everything, he said, gentler now. But I can tell you're holding something back. You don't have to be afraid of that with me. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to trust that someone could see past the surface without breaking the fragile parts beneath. But the urge to retreat was stronger, whispering that protection was safer than exposure. So I nodded, folding my notebook closed, sealing away my secrets for the moment. Maybe someday, I murmured, though I wasn't sure that day would ever come. As Ray stepped back and the door clicked shut behind him, the room felt emptier, the silence louder. The distance between us stretched, full of unsaid things, questions dangling like unfinished poems, waiting for the courage to be read aloud. In that quiet space, I wrestled with the ache of wanting to be known and the fear that being seen might mean losing myself entirely. Outside, the sky had been gathering gray breath all morning, clouds thickening until the first drops fell. Soft at first, like fingernails tapping lightly against a window pane. By the time I slipped into the teacher's lounge, the rain was insistent, drumming steadily, blurring the edges of the world outside like a watercolor left to bleed. The room smelled faintly of coffee and paper, but what caught me was the magazine carelessly left on the table near the window. Its glossy cover shimmered under the harsh fluorescent light. Bold letters shouting scandal and secrets. And there, staring back, was my mother's face. Her eyes, sharp and proud even in a tabloid photo, seemed to pierce right through the quiet hum of the room. The headline teased stories I had long tried to bury, rumors, whispers, a life I'd fled. My breath caught. The world tilted just a little. Outside, the rain hammered harder, thrumming against the glass like a warning. I wanted to turn away, to pretend it wasn't there, that the past wouldn't claw at the edges of my carefully built silence. But the pull was magnetic. I froze, fingers brushing the cool surface of the magazine, as if I could erase it. The storm outside mirrored the one inside me, unseen, relentless, gathering force beneath a fragile calm. Memories surged, wind-driven waves. Arguments shouted through closed doors, the suffocating weight of expectation, the fear that being truly seen would unravel everything. Rye's words from earlier echoed faintly, his gentle insistence that I didn't have to be afraid with him. But the walls I'd built were thick, and the past a shadow I couldn't shake. The rain's rhythm became a pulse against my chest, reminding me the storm wasn't just outside. I folded the magazine away quickly, as if hiding it could protect me from its truth. But protection felt fragile, like paper in a downpour. The hallways buzzed faintly beyond the lounge. But I was caught in a quiet tempest of my own making, where the past chased relentlessly, and the future remained a fragile, uncertain hope beneath the rain. The rain didn't stop. Long, steady, indifferent to school bells or passing umbrellas. I didn't go to class. I couldn't. My limbs moved, but not toward anything structured. I wandered, silent as breath, down the back stairwell, through the hall with flickering lights washed in old film. My steps eventually found the music room, barely lit, mostly forgotten. The door creaked softly as I slipped inside. Empty, or at least it looked that way. The piano sat like a quiet animal in the corner, keys untouched. I didn't touch them either. I sank to the floor by the window, back pressed to the cold wall, knees pulled up, hoping that if I made myself small enough, the world wouldn't find me. I didn't cry. It wasn't that. It was the feeling of being too full, like something inside me had expanded past its edges, and I was just trying not to split. The memory of my mother's eyes on that magazine burned too clearly. Her expression, the unspoken questions curling under bold headlines. The past had a cruel, persistent habit of showing up in places it didn't belong. The room smelled faintly of varnish and old strings. Rain kept its steady tempo, like a slow heartbeat. I rested my head against the wall. The silence didn't press. It held me. At some point, the door opened. I didn't move. Part of me didn't care who it was. But the footsteps, careful, unhurried, told me everything. Ray didn't say a word. He just sat down, a few feet away, not too close, just enough to feel the shift in the air, the way quiet changes when you're not alone. I kept my eyes on the far wall, but I could sense him, aware but patient, waiting without expectation. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was softer, deliberate. He didn't ask why I was there. He didn't say my name. And in that lack of intrusion, I felt seen in a way I hadn't known before. The way he sat, shoulders relaxed, hands loosely on his knees, made it clear he wouldn't push. Not today. Maybe not ever. And somehow, that undid me more than any question could. I wanted to say thank you, or sorry, or something to explain how I felt like glass, clear but breakable. But the words stayed trapped, wrapped too tightly around fear. So we just sat. Rain whispered against the windows like a language I almost remembered. And in that stillness, in that shared quiet, I didn't feel cornered. I didn't feel hunted. I just felt here. Rai leaned back slightly, letting his head rest against the wall, eyes closed, listening to the soft fall of the world outside. Maybe he really was. And maybe that was the moment I realized being seen didn't always mean exposure. Sometimes it meant being allowed to exist without explanation. That was the kind of quiet I didn't know how to ask for, and the kind he somehow knew how to give. I sat in front of my laptop, eyes tired, the screen a blur, the cursor blinking steadily on that empty browser bar. The poetry forum was still open in the background, the place where my thoughts used to spill freely, where I dared to expose little pieces of myself to strangers who might understand. But tonight it felt like a wound reopening every time I clicked on it. Every time I imagined Haru or Rei reading those words without really seeing me, I moved the mouse slowly, like I could will courage into my fingers. And then, finally, quiet as a whisper, I deleted the forum from my bookmarks. It wasn't just a digital gesture. It felt like erasing a thread, a connection I'd clung to in the dark. I told myself it was for my own good, to stop hoping, to stop risking, but the ache beneath it whispered something different. The days that followed were a series of shrinking moments. I avoided the places where Haru lingered, the crowded hallways where Rei's voice reached me. I kept my head down in class, pulled my jacket tighter around my wrists, and spoke less than before. It wasn't anger or spite pushing me away. It was fear. Fear that if I let my guard down even a little, they'd see the cracks, the unfinished edges of the person I was trying to hide. Sometimes, when no one was watching, I caught my reflection in the glass of the classroom window or a tablet's shiny surface. The girl who looked back was a stranger, eyes too wide, too cautious, lips pressed into a line that tasted like silence. I wanted to reach out to her, tell her it was okay to be seen, but the words got tangled in my chest, knots too tight to unravel. Haru must have noticed. The way his laughter no longer chased me down hallways, how his teasing lost its lightness when I passed. And Rei, his gaze lingered a moment too long when he thought I wasn't looking, a quiet question folded beneath the surface. But no one asked. No one pushed. Maybe they knew better than to break through my walls with force. So I kept retreating. Into my notebooks, pages thick with crossed-out lines and half-formed poems I wouldn't share. Into the silence that felt safer than any conversation. Into the loneliness of pretending everything was fine. The world kept moving around me, colors dimming at the edges, conversations fading into distant echoes. I wondered if they missed me, the real me, the one who still trembled beneath the surface, or if I'd already become just another shadow in the background like I always feared. And maybe, in some quiet corner of my heart, I hoped someone might reach out anyway. But wanting that felt like the greatest risk of all. The classroom hummed with its usual chatter, soft background noise that was both comforting and suffocating. Our group was supposed to be working on a project, a simple enough task on paper, but the air between Rei and Haru had thickened into something taut, like a wire stretched too far. I sat just off to the side, notebooks open but untouched, my gaze flickering between them as the words spilled out. "It's not about making it flashy," Haru said, voice low but sharp, fingers tapping on the table like he was counting out his patience. "We need to be real, not just loud for the sake of it." Rei's jaw tightened, eyes narrowing, but he didn't back down. Real doesn't mean sloppy. There's a difference between honesty and laziness. They circled each other with words, tension wrapped tightly around their voices like a cloak. I recognized the pattern, Rei's calm precision clashing with Haru's impulsive energy, and somewhere beneath the noise, I felt that same battle stirring inside me. I said nothing. It felt safer that way, watching their rivalry unfold from the sidelines, caught between wanting to intervene and needing to disappear further into myself. "You always think you're right," Haru shot back, leaning forward, eyes flashing. "Maybe you should try listening for once. And maybe you should try thinking before you speak," Rei replied evenly, but his words were a knife in the quiet. The room shrank around me, edges blurring like a watercolor bleeding in the rain. I wanted to reach out, to smooth the jagged lines between them, and between myself and the parts I was hiding. But every time I opened my mouth, the words tangled and slipped away, leaving only the silence that felt more honest than any explanation. As the argument faded into a grudging truce, I caught Haru's glance flicker briefly toward me, uncertain, almost searching. Rei's expression softened too, but that quiet question in his eyes was a weight I wasn't ready to carry. So I stayed silent, the space between us filled with everything left unsaid, the fractures in our fragile connections, the hidden truths we weren't ready to face. And somewhere deep inside, the ache settled like a quiet shadow, a reminder that being caught in the middle meant carrying pieces of both, even when it hurt. The library smelled like old paper and quiet prayers, the kind you whispered when you wanted to disappear. I sat at a corner table, hands wrapped around a mug of lukewarm tea I barely tasted, the weight of the day pressing down like a stone in my chest. Outside, rain streaked the windows, blurring the edges of the world, just like my thoughts. I had been trying to hold myself together all day, but the fragments were sharp, jagged, threatening to splinter me into pieces I didn't know how to gather. The silence around me felt too loud, echoing all the things I didn't say, all the walls I kept building higher. I leaned forward, forehead resting on the cool wood of the table, and let the tears come. Quiet, almost polite, slipping like rain through cracks. A sudden sound startled me, a book falling from a shelf, pages fanning open like a secret spilled. I glanced up, eyes red and blurry, and saw a thin notebook wedged between two textbooks. Rye's handwriting curled across the pages, neat but trembling, raw. Hesitant, I picked it up, paper thin beneath my fingers, and began to read. His words were a mirror to my own shadowed thoughts, the weight of expectations, the quiet loneliness behind a calm facade, the fear of being too much and not enough at once. He wrote about wanting to be understood, the invisible cracks beneath the surface, moments when the mask slipped and everything felt unbearably real. Reading him was like finding a small, flickering light in a room I thought was pitch black. Private, vulnerable, utterly human. For the first time in a long while, I felt less alone in the tangled mess I was trying to hide. I didn't know if Ray would ever see me, the real me, or understand the quiet battles I fought every day. But in that fragile moment, holding his words close, something shifted. Maybe I didn't have to stay invisible forever. Maybe there was a place where I could be seen without breaking. I closed the notebook gently, looked out at the rain, and felt the ache in my chest soften just a little, like the sky itself was washing away some of the weight. The world didn't suddenly make sense, but it felt a little less lonely, and that was enough to keep me breathing, to keep me hoping. The festival unfolded around me like a burst of color in a grayscale world. Paper lanterns swaying gently above, soft amber light flickering against the night sky, mingling with the sharp scent of grilled food and distant laughter. I stayed at the edges, a shadow drifting between clusters of light, less participant, more ghost. I watched groups of friends lean close, sharing secrets and smiles so effortless they seemed to belong to another world. The warmth of their connection was almost painful, a reminder of the walls I'd spent so long building, walls that now felt like a cage. My hands trembled slightly as I held a cup of soda, condensation cold against my skin, grounding me in the quiet space I'd claimed. The lanterns blurred softly above, casting patterns like tiny stars fallen to earth. It was beautiful, chaotic, and alive. And yet, beneath the glow, loneliness curled in my chest, whispering that I was still watching from a distance, still waiting for a reason to step fully into the light. Somewhere in the crowd, I caught a glimpse of movement, a burst of laughter, a familiar tilt of a head, and I knew Haru was here, his presence threading through the noise like an unseen pulse. His energy was different from Ray's quiet intensity, more unpredictable, like fireworks flaring against the dark. I felt a flicker inside me, a quiet curiosity, maybe even fragile hope, that the walls I'd built so carefully might not have to hold forever. As I walked past the stalls, the sounds blurred into a gentle hum. For a moment, the distance between me and the world felt a little less wide. Maybe the night's glow wasn't just for others. Maybe it could reach me too. The school's forum buzzed with the usual chatter, homework complaints, recycled jokes, selfies, memes. But something new caught my eye, pinned to the top like a secret waiting to be discovered. A poem, unsigned, raw and trembling. A poem that didn't hide behind pretty words but reached out with open, shaking hands. I read it slowly, each word pressing softly against the quiet spaces in my chest. I don't want to be loved. I just want someone to stay. Almost too honest, too naked to be casual, a confession whispered where no one else could hear. But it spoke directly to the corners of my own hidden fears. I imagined the writer, the rough edges beneath a carefully crafted mask, the longing that wasn't about fairy tales or grand gestures, but something smaller, quieter, unbearably real. Haru. I hadn't seen his words here before, but the rhythm, the vulnerability, it felt like him. The boy who joked and teased, but with a flicker of something more, a softness beneath the sharp edges. This wasn't the Haru from classrooms or hallways. This was the Haru who didn't want to be loved, just seen, just held steady in a world that spun too fast. My heart trembled in a way it hadn't for a long time. Strange comfort in knowing I wasn't the only one carrying this fragile ache. The poem didn't fix anything. It didn't answer questions, but it opened a crack, a sliver of light where I could start to imagine being understood without explaining every broken piece. I held my breath, wondering if this quiet honesty could reach into the spaces between us, into the silence that kept us apart. Maybe, just maybe, this poem was the first step towards something real. Backstage was quieter, a soft refuge from the festival's bright chaos. I found Haru leaning against empty crates, his grin softened, less guarded. Dim light caught the curve of his jaw, and I hesitated. Step closer or retreat? But the poem lingered, an invisible thread pulling me forward. "Hey," I said softly, almost a whisper against the hum of laughter. He glanced up, surprise flickering in his eyes, masked quickly by a twitch of that familiar teasing smirk. "What's up? Stalking the mysterious poet now?" I smiled faintly, shook my head. "It wasn't about love, was it?" The words hung fragile, unspoken in so many ways. He shifted, shoulders dropping like a shield falling slowly. His eyes softened. "No," he admitted, voice low. "It was about being afraid. Afraid of everything." I nodded, feeling the weight settle. I get that. It's not about fairy tales or perfect stories. It's about someone who won't run away when things get messy. He looked at me, really looked, searching for a way to say what he couldn't. The space between us felt charged, not heat, not tension, but something more delicate. The beginning of trust. That poem, it's a confession, isn't it? I whispered. "Maybe," he said, eyes holding mine longer than usual. No jokes hiding behind them. In that quiet backstage corner, muffled festival sounds fading into night, walls we hadn't realized we built started to crack. We didn't need to say more. Sometimes the smallest admissions hold the most meaning. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought. The silence stretched between us. Not awkward, just heavy, like all the unspoken truths were finally touching daylight. Haru's eyes held mine in a way that made me want to look away, but I couldn't. They weren't teasing or sharp. They were steady, searching, raw in a way I wasn't used to seeing. "You see me, don't you?" His voice was low, almost a question, fragile, like saying it out loud might shatter something delicate between us. I swallowed hard. Yeah. I saw him, all of him. The jokes that cracked the surface, the armor he wore, and now the tremble underneath, the quiet fear I knew too well. "Yeah," he said simply. No smirk, no challenge. "You're afraid too." Those words fell like a soft confession, breaking open the space between us. My walls trembled. The fear wasn't just his. It was mine too. The fear of being seen, truly seen, and maybe even rejected. He stepped a little closer, and the dim backstage light caught the curve of his jaw, the softness in his eyes just enough to let the vulnerability in. His hands hung loose at his sides, no longer clenched or hiding behind a joke. For a moment, neither of us spoke. The distant echoes of laughter from the festival felt like a world away. In this quiet corner, it was just us, two scared kids trying to figure out what it meant to be known. "You're not alone," I whispered, barely a breath. Haru's lips twitched into a small, genuine smile. Not teasing, not bravado, real, a fragile thread connecting us through the shadows. "Thanks," he said, voice rough but sincere. Being seen felt like stepping off a cliff, terrifying, yes, but maybe, just maybe, there was a soft place to land. And in that moment, under the pale glow of the backstage lights, I let myself believe that softness might stay. He sat on the edge of the crate, elbows resting on his knees, fingers loosely laced. The festival's noise was a distant hum now, like the tide pulling away. I stayed close, not touching, just near enough to feel the warmth between us. Not heat, not spark, just presence. For a long time, neither of us spoke. There was no rush to fill the silence. It sat there like something sacred, something earned. Maybe we both knew that the wrong words would break what had just begun. Not fragile exactly, just new. And new things always feel delicate at first. He let out a breath, the kind that comes after holding something in too long. "You know," he said, eyes on the floor, I used to think love was just a word people used when they didn't know how to explain being lonely together. I didn't answer right away. I watched the curve of his shoulder, the way his voice didn't rise or fall. Honest, unmasked. I knew that tone. I'd used it once, whispering into a pillow I didn't trust to keep secrets. Yeah, I murmured. I used to think love was a trick, a thing people wanted so badly they'd pretend it was real even when it wasn't. He looked at me then, slowly, and nodded, like we'd just named something we didn't even know we'd been carrying. Some shared ache. I don't really believe in it, he said. No bitterness, just tiredness. A quiet, worn-out truth. Not the version people write songs about. Me neither, I said, steady. But sometimes, maybe believing in it isn't the point. Maybe just showing up is. He smiled. Not crooked, not teasing. Just there. Showing up, huh? I nodded, tucking a strand of hair behind my ear. Even when you're scared. Especially then. The lights flickered outside the open backstage door, casting shifting shapes across the floor. Somewhere in the distance, someone laughed too loudly. And the spell didn't break. It bent gently around the sound. I don't need someone to promise forever, I said after a while. I just don't want to keep pretending I don't feel things. Haru tilted his head back, eyes tracing the ceiling beams, looking for a shape to hold his words. Maybe love isn't one big thing. Maybe it's just the little ways we don't run. The words settled beneath my ribs. I didn't speak. My hand drifted close enough that if he moved, our fingers might brush. He didn't take it, didn't pull away. Just let the space stay open. That was enough. In that moment, neither of us needed to believe in love. We only needed to believe in this. The not running, the honesty, the stillness. To sit side by side, broken in different places, and not try to fix anything. Just stay. I didn't see him at first. I was focused on Haru's shoulder, barely angled toward mine, unsure if he'd stay or leave. The moment hung in the air, neither expanding nor collapsing. Just there, like breath caught in the back of my throat. Then something shifted behind us. A quiet kind of presence, purposeful. I turned slightly and saw him. Ray, half shadowed, half seen, just beyond the light. A paused thought. He wasn't moving, just watching. Not angry, not sharp, just still. Like someone finally letting themselves stop pretending they weren't paying attention. Slowly, quietly, he turned and walked away, soundless. Like the choice had already been made. I didn't follow. Maybe I should have. Maybe another version of me would have. But in that moment, I just watched where he'd been and felt something settle softly, like a door that didn't need to slam. Haru hadn't turned around. Maybe he didn't notice. Maybe he did and just didn't say anything. Either way, he stayed beside me, and the silence folded around us, different now. Not untouched, but not broken. There was something respectful in the way Ray left. Like he knew this wasn't about winning or losing. Like maybe he'd finally stopped trying to read me through who he thought I was. I exhaled slowly. The light outside had dimmed a little more. The sky bruised into evening, streaks of blue bleeding into pinks and soft orange. A sky that made you feel small but honest. I didn't know what would happen next. With Ray, with Haru, with me. But I didn't feel like I was floating outside of myself anymore. I felt here, present, maybe even seen, and maybe that was enough for now. The room was dim. A single desk lamp cast a soft pool of light over my scattered notebooks. I sat there, fingers hovering over the pen, feeling the weight of years of silence, words I hadn't trusted before. Tonight felt different. The quiet inside me wasn't empty. It was waiting. I didn't know if the words would be good. They weren't meant to be. Just raw, imperfect truth that stumbles out when you stop guarding every thought. I scribbled a line, then another, until the paper held a trembling confession. Soft things stay, even when the world tries to sweep them away like whispers caught in the ribs, fragile, but never quite gone. There was comfort in the act, not because it fixed anything, but because it let me touch something real. The rhythm of the words felt like a heartbeat returning after a long stillness. I read them back, feeling a flicker of hope. Not bright or blinding, just quiet, steady. Maybe softness could endure. I folded the paper, slid it into my notebook, and let the silence wrap around me like a gentle promise. Maybe this was where it began, not with grand declarations, but with the courage to be imperfect, to show up for myself when no one was watching. Even a moment was enough. The next morning, the forum felt warmer, less cold. There it was, Haru's new handle. Sometimes, soft things stay. Just 5 words, simple but weighted, making my breath hitch. I didn't know if it was meant for me. Didn't matter. Reading it felt like an invitation, letting something real in between us. No masks, no games. I imagined him typing it, fingers trembling slightly, unsure, vulnerable. That small shift in a name felt like a thread pulling us closer through the silence we'd both hidden behind. I didn't reply. Didn't have to. Sometimes words aren't about saying something new. They're about saying what's been there all along. And in that acknowledgement, a fragile hope took root, soft but steady, like a pulse beneath the quiet. For the first time in a long while, I allowed myself to imagine what might come next. Not a plan, not a promise, just possibility whispered between us. And maybe that was enough. Maybe that was everything. After the last class emptied, the halls echoed with muffled footsteps. I lingered by my locker longer than usual, maybe waiting for something, maybe someone. Mostly, just steadying the fluttering in my chest, the kind that doesn't settle even in silence. Then I noticed it. A small folded piece of paper, tucked almost shyly between the books I'd left earlier. A soft crease in the stack. The handwriting familiar. Careful, deliberate. Thanks for staying long enough to see me. H. The words felt like a breath held and released. Not a confession. Not a demand. Just acknowledgement. Haru, with all his teasing and restless energy, had taken the time to fold something small and meaningful, to slip it in without fanfare or expectation. I traced the lines with my finger, feeling a warmth that surprised me. A few simple words carrying weight, whispered in stillness. Sometimes soft things stay, even when we think they'll vanish, like that thread of connection slowly weaving between us. Part of me wanted to write back. Part of me just wanted to hold onto the note a little longer, letting the quiet hope settle like a secret. Maybe this was the start of something real. Not loud, not urgent, but steady, patient. And for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel quite so alone. The afternoon air was cool, gentle, as I stepped out of the school building. The sunlight softened the edges of the world. Haru was waiting by the gates, leaning against the brick wall, that usual casual smirk on his face. But today, his eyes held something quieter. When I didn't turn away or slip past him, he straightened and gave a small, almost shy nod. We started walking side by side. At first, we didn't say much. The rhythm of our steps blended with the rustling of leaves and the distant hum of the city, easing into evening. It wasn't an awkward silence. It was the kind that comes from familiarity, like a shared secret spoken without words. I figured it's easier, walking together, he said quietly, low enough that only I could hear. No teasing, no double meanings, just a simple truth. I nodded, feeling that small kindness settle inside me like a warm shadow. The world seemed a little less sharp, edges softened by the presence beside me. It was strange how his pace matched mine without forcing anything. No grand gestures, just the gentle flow of two lives intersecting quietly. We passed the park I used to visit alone. The swings swayed faintly in the breeze, empty now. I thought about how lonely those afternoons had felt, the ache of wanting to be seen but never daring to reach out. And now, here he was, walking with me, not as a game, not as a joke, but as someone who just wanted to be near. So, Haru said, breaking the silence with a half smile, what's your favorite place around here? I hesitated, caught off guard by the simplicity. I don't know. Maybe the library. It's quiet, and the light filters in just right in the afternoon. He glanced over at me, his smile softening. I get that. Places that feel like a breath. For a moment, I thought about telling him more, about the stories I buried in notebooks, the parts of me I kept folded away like fragile paper. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I kept my gaze forward, letting the quiet companionship speak for both of us. The path curved, the sun dipping lower, spilling pale orange across the sky. I felt the loneliness inside me recede, softened by the simple truth that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't as alone as I thought, and in that small space between us, something tender began to take root, soft, cautious, real. The sky faded into a muted blue, holding the last warmth of day without fully giving way to night. We lingered by the corner cafe. The air smelled of brewing coffee and faint chatter. Haru's eyes caught mine, not teasing, not sharp, but quietly attentive, making the space between us feel charged. I wanted to tell him the truth I'd carried like a fragile secret, to let the words slip out slow and steady, like a confession whispered to the night. But fear pressed thick against my chest, the fear of exposure, of unraveling piece by piece. Instead, I breathed in sharply, letting it dissolve in the evening air. My fingers tightened around my bag strap, a small anchor against the swirling uncertainty. Haru shifted closer, a quiet reminder that maybe, just maybe, I didn't have to face it all alone. "You're quiet tonight," he said softly, blending with the hum of the city. I hesitated, searching for courage to bridge the gap. "It's nothing," I finally said, my words both a shield and a denial. He didn't press, but I could see a flicker, curiosity, maybe concern, playing behind his eyes. "You know you can tell me," he said, not demanding, just offering patience. I nodded, small, heavy with meaning. The cracks in my walls were visible. Yes, but I was holding myself together. And for now, that was enough. We stood there in that fragile quiet, an unspoken promise that some truths would come when they were ready, and that the tenderness of waiting could be shared. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the classroom windows, casting long shadows across the desks. Ray stood by the door, calm but steady. The tension between us was replaced by something quieter, almost understanding. "I'm not going to say anything," he said, voice low even, like it was less a concession and more a promise. His words hung gently, carrying weight that wasn't heavy, just real. I searched his face for signs, skepticism, impatience, but found only quiet respect. I was surprised at how much I wanted to believe him. "You don't owe me anything," Ray continued, meeting my gaze with honesty that felt almost tender. "If you want to keep things to yourself, that's okay, but I want you to know, you deserve more than hiding." His softness caught me off guard, unraveling the tight coil of fear I'd held inside. No pressure, no expectations, just space where vulnerability could breathe if I chose. I swallowed, nodded, the gesture small but heavy with acknowledgement. Maybe guarding my secret was okay. Maybe revealing it, when ready, was its own kind of strength. Rai's expression softened, a flicker of hope there too. Not for revelation, not for confession, just the possibility of connection, without pretense, without fear. The room stayed still, bathed in late afternoon light, as if the world was holding its breath alongside me. Vulnerability didn't have to be given away. It could be held carefully until the moment was right. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. The desk in my room was quiet, a safe little island where I could spread out my thoughts. I pulled my notebook close, the rustle of paper and scratch of pen filling the stillness. No one was watching. No one expected anything. Just me and the slow act of putting fragments of myself into words. I hadn't written in months. It felt strange, like stepping back into a room I'd locked away. But when the pen touched paper, the tension in my chest eased, replaced by something softer, a tentative thread of courage weaving through the quiet. The ink formed slow, steady lines, not for anyone but me. Each sentence was a small reclaiming of voice, a gentle unfolding of the parts I'd kept folded tight. It wasn't about telling a story. It was about feeling it, the ache, the hope, the tremors of vulnerability that hadn't dared to speak. Outside, the light shifted against the window, silent witness to this fragile act. Writing wasn't a habit or hobby. It was a refuge, a place where the fear of being known didn't shrink me, but invited me to stretch, to breathe, to become. I realized the risk of being known wasn't exposing everything at once. It was choosing when to unfold, showing up with pieces still guarded, softened by trust. Maybe these quiet pages were the first step, not toward a grand reveal, but toward gentle, steady healing. The words kept coming, a quiet rhythm beneath the stillness. And with each line, I felt a little more whole. I didn't know why I said yes to the literature club. Maybe it was the quiet invitation Haru slipped into my locker, or maybe the slow comfort I'd begun to feel in the spaces he inhabited. That day, the afternoon light folded softly around the desks and worn shelves filled with books that smelled like rain and old paper, a small sanctuary from the hallways and the weight of my secret. Inside, the room hummed with gentle energy. Warm voices, soft laughter, easy, effortless. I was nervous, hands fiddling with my bag strap, heart quietly thrumming. The others glanced up, eyes curious, kind, not demanding too much. Haru lounged against the windowsill like he owned the place. His expression was casual, but I caught a flicker in his eyes, hope wrapped in surprise. He didn't say much, Just a small nod that said more than words ever could. I found a seat near the back, tracing the desk's edge. The room felt like a fragile thread connecting us. A place where I could start to untangle myself from the layers wrapped tightly around my heart. Conversation floated around, stories shared and listened to. The rhythm slow, steady. Haru leaned over once, voice low, playful but soft. See? Not so bad, right? His eyes met mine, holding the moment longer than it should. No pressure, no expectation. Just a quiet invitation to be part of something, to be seen without masks. I wanted to believe him. Maybe this was where I belonged, at least for now. The literature, the silence between words, the gentle way people spoke of dreams and fears, it whispered I didn't have to be invisible anymore. In that softly lit room, with my secret still quietly at my side, I let the first roots of belonging take hold. The rooftop was our quiet refuge, suspended between school life and unfolding dusk. The city stretched below, lights flickering like timid stars, each one holding a story. I settled beside Haru on the rough concrete ledge, cool air brushing my skin, carrying distant traffic and an occasional night bird. I wasn't sure why I asked it. Maybe it felt like the only question worth asking in a delicate, still moment. Is this what love feels like? My voice barely above a whisper, fragile enough to shatter or disappear. Haru didn't answer immediately. He looked out over the city, tracing the horizon, searching for an answer written in the sky. Finally, he spoke, quiet honesty threading through each word. I don't know. I guess. I don't hate it. No grand declarations. No certainty. Just two people side by side, leaning into love's uncertainty, a thing fragile, fierce, more question than answer. I realized maybe love wasn't about having it all figured out. Maybe it was about sitting with the unknown, holding it gently without trying to tame it. Haru added softly, maybe some things don't need labels to mean something. The words settled between us, a quiet promise, a gentle acknowledgement that what we felt, undefined, was enough. I breathed into that softness, city lights blurring into a shimmering backdrop for something tender, something wild. For the first time in a long while, I let the silence be whole, unafraid. We didn't need more. The night held our unspoken truths, the spaces between words filled with quiet belonging. And as the stars blinked awake overhead, a fragile hope unfurled. Yes, fragile, but real. The dorm was unusually quiet that afternoon. It wasn't the kind of silence that pressed down on you, but one that felt full of space, room to breathe and room to think. I was rifling through the old bookshelf by my window, a corner I hadn't touched in years. My fingers paused on a tattered magazine, edges softened by time and careless handling. The cover held a familiar face. My mother's. The headlines teased scandal and controversy, but what stopped me was the interview inside, something I'd never really read before. I settled down with it, the weight of the magazine in my lap, pages crinkling softly as I turned them. Her voice rose quietly from the ink, each word a fragile thread connecting past and present. I read under my breath, hesitating, skipping lines, throat tight with buried memories. She spoke of writing as both salvation and curse, a gift tangled with mistakes and regrets. She said, "Every word I write is a piece of myself I'm willing to lose," I murmured. For a moment, the room narrowed to just me and her voice, trembling, raw, like a song half forgotten. The bitterness I'd carried toward her, the resentment for her silence, the shame, softened just enough to let a sliver of curiosity slip in. Her story wasn't just headlines or whispers in the dark. It was messy, beautiful, flawed, like mine. I imagined her, younger, fierce but unsure, trying to speak her truth in a world that tried to drown her out. Not defeated or distant, but human. I traced the words again, feeling the echo of a voice I both feared and longed for, wondering if maybe, just maybe, her legacy wasn't something to hide from, but something to understand. Closing the magazine, the quiet settled differently around me, less like a wall, more like a door left ajar. My own voice, still trembling, seemed to wait just beyond it. Could I find it? Would I dare? The question lingered softly, like the last light slipping through the window. Gentle, insistent. The words lingered in my mind as I sat by the window, watching the gray sky slowly unravel its storm. Raindrops traced delicate, winding paths down the glass, each one a small, trembling journey to the ground. I thought about the times I ran, not just across streets to escape curious eyes, but from myself. from the parts I feared the most. The girl who kept her name secret, who hid behind silence and shadows, afraid that speaking would shatter her into uncollectible fragments. I remember that night when I skipped class, wandering the rain-soaked paths near campus, hoping the cold would wash away the weight of pretending. My footsteps were the only thing I could trust, even though my heart hammered like it wanted to break free. I wasn't running toward anything. I was running away from the truth that maybe I was too afraid to be seen, even by myself. The rain eased, the clouds thinned, letting a sliver of sunlight push through. I whispered the line again, almost afraid to give it life outside the pages. You don't have to be fearless to fall in love. My voice was soft, barely a breath, but it felt like a promise. Courage wasn't about vanishing fear. It was about sitting with it, letting it ripple through without losing shape. I could almost hear my mother's voice then, unsteady but unyielding, carrying that fragile hope. And something shifted. I wasn't pretending anymore that fear could protect me. Maybe it was okay to stumble forward, uncertain, trembling. I looked down at my hands. The faint scars I'd hidden for so long caught the sunlight. They weren't failures, they were reminders. I realized running hadn't healed me. It only stretched the distance between who I was and who I wanted to be. So I stayed with the fear, with uncertainty, with the quiet ache of wanting something real. Because maybe falling in love, whether with someone else or with myself, wasn't about being brave all at once. It was about trying, again and again. The sky brightened a little more, and with it, a small but steady warmth unfurled inside me. Fragile, like a new bloom, but real. The poem came slowly, like a first breath after surfacing from deep water. Not panic, not urgency, just the quiet ache of wanting to be known. I sat at my desk, knees pulled up, the cursor blinking on the blank page like it was waiting for me to stop hiding. I'd written before, tucked away in notebooks, but this was different. This wasn't about keeping. This was about releasing. At first, the words clung in my throat. I typed, deleted, typed again. Everything felt too much or not enough, too careful, too loud, too close. Then I remembered how the rain had eased the day before, letting the light back in. And I thought of my mother's voice, worn, human, not asking forgiveness, just speaking. That was enough. That was everything. The first line wasn't brilliant. It wouldn't win awards or be dissected in class, but it was mine. Not NF, not anonymous. Mine, shaky but clear. I wrote about silence, how it grew like ivy in my chest, curling around what I didn't say. About names, ones we give ourselves and ones we run from. About standing in the rain and letting it see me. It wasn't a love poem exactly, but it was full of love, the kind that comes from choosing to be soft even when staying invisible feels safer. When I finished, I read it twice. I didn't change much, just fixed a line that felt rehearsed. I didn't want perfect, I wanted real. The submission page blinked back at me. My name was already there from before, but back then I'd erased it, replaced it with a pseudonym. This time, I let it stay. Nao Fujimura. Each letter felt heavier than it looked, like laying down a stone I'd carried too long. Not burying, building. My finger hovered over the button. My stomach twisted. Not with regret, but with rawness, the kind that follows truth. I thought about who would read it, who would whisper, who would know. Then I thought of the quiet after rain, the hush of something just beginning. I clicked submit. And in that tiny sound, barely louder than a breath, I felt something open in me. Not a roar, not triumph, just a space I hadn't dared to claim before. Quietly mine. I passed the old dorm hallway without meaning to, footsteps soft against worn floorboards that held faint echoes. The flickering light cast long, hesitant shadows. There, leaning against the wall, the cracked, full-length mirror I always avoided, caught my eye. For so long, it had been a silent witness to the parts of me I refused to meet. The girl who shrank away, the name I hid, the fears I carried like invisible scars. Before, I would have walked past, head down, pretending the reflection didn't exist. But today, something pulled me closer. I stopped. Breath caught between hesitation and curiosity. The glass was smudged in places, not unlike the messy edges of my story, blurring the image just enough to keep it uncertain, imperfect. I looked up. The face staring back wasn't flawless. There were faint lines around my eyes, traces of sleepless nights and whispered doubts. My hands bore the pale scars I once tried to erase, and yet, it was me. Fully, undeniably me. The reflection didn't flinch. It didn't judge. It simply was, holding space for all my fragments. The daughter of a famous novelist, the girl afraid to be known, the silent poet who finally dared to speak. In that moment, I realized what stays isn't just the pain or the hiding. It's the courage to face broken pieces and see them as part of the whole. The light caught the curve of my lips, a barely smile, enough to soften the shadows inside. My eyes held a steadiness they hadn't known before. Steady like the quiet after rain, calm like the place you arrive when you stop running. I turned away, not to escape, but because I no longer needed to hide. What stays now isn't fear or shame. It's the start of a story I'm ready to own, written in the spaces between silence and voice, light and shadow, past and what's still unfolding. I walked down the same hallway where I once scoffed at romance novels, walls echoing my denials, my whispered refusals to be seen. Afternoon lights spilled through the windows, dust motes dancing in warmth, tiny confessions floating just out of reach. My footsteps barely stirred the quiet, but the world felt softer, less sharp. Near the bulletin board, a cluster of voices murmured low admiration. I paused, pretending to check a schedule, but really I was drawn by the gentle warmth. There, in neat handwriting, was my poem, the one I finally dared to sign. Vulnerable, unpolished, beautiful. A voice broke through. "Did you see who wrote this?" "Now Fujimura. It's really good." The words floated toward me, tender and unexpected. No teasing, no doubt, just a small recognition, like a breath of fresh air against bruised skin. I didn't look away. I let the warmth settle, a quiet bloom inside me. Pride, maybe, or just acceptance of being seen and still standing. The poem wasn't perfect. It was a fragment of me laid bare. That was enough. My eyes lingered on the edges of the paper, words folding into each other like soft promises. Weeks ago, I would have erased my name, hidden behind shadows and pseudonyms. Now, my name was there, steady and sure, a small light in the dim hallway. The murmurs faded, footsteps resumed. The hallway returned to its rhythm. But for a moment, I stayed, breathing in the quiet acknowledgement that I didn't have to hide anymore. My walls were still there, but cracks had formed, gentle openings where light and truth could seep through. Maybe, just maybe, it's how stories start. Not with grand declarations or loud confessions, but with a single soft breath, a name, a voice, a poem waiting to be heard. I reached the school gate as the afternoon sun dipped lower, the light softening everything, casting long, forgiving shadows across the pavement. The gate, which had once felt like a barrier, cold and unyielding, now felt quieter, lighter. And there was Haru, waiting near the bike racks, leaning casually against the metal bars. He wasn't urgent, he wasn't demanding. He was calm, just holding space. As I got closer, our eyes met, and he offered a small, easy smile. Not the teasing grin I'd known before, but something gentler, more real. No rush to fill the silence. It just settled around us, soft, familiar, comfortable. Then Ray appeared from the other side, walking past with that quiet, effortless grace. Our eyes met briefly, and she nodded. Just a nod. No suspicion, no tension. Just acknowledgement. And in that simple gesture, I realized how much had changed. How sharp edges had softened into something peaceful, balanced. For a moment, I held my breath, surprised at how easily what had once felt like a triangle of unease now felt calm, contained. Haru's gaze steady, Rai's nod quiet but true. Between us, a new understanding bloomed, not loud, not dramatic, just honest, grown from respect and patience. I felt light, something I hadn't thought possible here, in this place I'd once wanted to escape. The cool breeze stirred the leaves at our feet, carrying away old fears. And in that stillness, I realized peace isn't about fixing everything. Sometimes it's about letting go enough to make room for something new, a gentle harmony stitched from courage and quiet hope. Haru's eyes twinkled as we leaned against the fence near the gate. "So," he said, that familiar teasing curl on his lips, "do you still think romance is just fiction?" I looked up, the question lingering between us like leaves stirred by a soft breeze. We'd danced around this before, but this time felt different. I let a small smile slip free, not the guarded smile of old, but a tentative, hopeful one. "I guess," I said slowly, "I still see romance as fiction, but fiction isn't just made-up stories. It's the way we try to understand what can't be fully explained, those real, messy emotions that don't fit neatly into words." Haru's grin softened, warm, genuine. "So, you believe in the feeling, even if the story might not be real?" I nodded, fragile, quiet hope weaving itself between us. "Yeah, maybe it's not about a perfect love story, but about the moments that make it feel real, even when they're messy or uncertain." He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from my face. Gentle, surprising. "Sounds like you've changed," he said softly. No judgment, just an invitation. I laughed, a light, warm sound. "Maybe I have." And there it was, beneath the fading sun, stepping into something new. Not certain, not promised, just open. Fragile, beautiful, imperfect. We left the gate behind, the warmth folding into cool evening. Quiet streets stretched out, occasional rustle of leaves or distant chatter from homes settling into night. Our footsteps found a soft rhythm, an unspoken harmony that didn't need words. Haru walked beside me, calm, steady. I noticed him relax in the fading light, taking in the small details around us. The cracked sidewalk, the lamplight pooling in golden circles. It was effortless, silent companionship, no pressure. No need to define anything, just being together. Inside me, a delicate peace settled, a contrast to the storms I'd carried. The silence wasn't empty. It felt full, like a shared secret held without speaking. I caught the subtle ways our steps synced, the fleeting glances that said everything and nothing. I wanted to savor this closeness that didn't need to be loud or dramatic. Sometimes the truest connection is just showing up, being there, steady, unadorned. The world could spin its complicated stories, but here, under the soft evening sky, we were enough. A cool breeze carried the faint scent of rain, and I let my shoulders drop, trusting that this silence wasn't a void but a conversation of its own. No whispered promises, no shouted declarations, just the quiet pulse of two people walking side by side. Back in my dorm room, the silence wrapped around me like a soft shawl. The window cracked, letting in cool night air tinged with rain, calm settling inside me, something I hadn't known I was craving. I sank onto my bed, soft sheets comforting, and reached for my notebook on the desk. Blank, pristine, waiting. It was different this time. I wasn't the girl who feared words, hiding stories behind silence or half-truths. My fingers hesitated briefly, then opened the cover. The pages invited me to write without apology, without armor. The pen felt light but purposeful, a tool to carve out space where I could be fully seen, not through shadows or whispers, but honestly. I paused, inhaled, then let my thoughts spill. Not a perfect love story, not triumph, just the messy threads of connection. Doubt, laughter, fear, fragile hope. The story didn't need to be neat. It could hold everything I'd once hidden. Loneliness, small victories, unspoken longings in the spaces between words. As ink flowed, so did something inside me. A sense of agency, a reclaiming of my voice that had long been muffled. I wasn't writing to escape or protect. I was writing to live. Each sentence a step forward, each fragment a quiet declaration. I was ready to embrace this imperfect, unfolding story that was mine. And beneath it all, one line emerged. A whisper from my heart I barely dared say aloud. Maybe this is what it means to be alive. Messy, uncertain, but wholly real. I closed the notebook gently, ink still fresh. For the first time in a long while, I felt like I was beginning to tell my own story. Outside, twilight draped the sky, soft purples and ash blues melting together like breath. City lights blinked on slowly, not hurried, not showy, just present. Something about that, the way light insists on returning after darkness, made me want to stay still and watch. And I did. I leaned my forehead against the glass, the faint chill grounding me. The notebook sat on my desk, closed but not forgotten, part of me I could finally carry without fear. No perfect endings, no sweeping gestures, just truth, fragmented, unfinished, real. And somehow that was enough. The words I had read in secret came back, warm instead of aching. Sometimes soft things stay. Not because they're perfect, but because someone chooses to hold on. I hadn't fully understood it before. Maybe I still didn't, but I was beginning to believe in the weight of softness, in the quiet courage it takes to stay. The door opened behind me, not abrupt, just a gentle click. Someone who didn't need to announce themselves. I didn't turn immediately. I didn't have to. Haru stepped up beside me, a faint silhouette in the glass. No words. No questions. We just stood, looking at the same sky. He smelled faintly of soap and cool air. Familiar, safe. His shoulder brushed mine. Not much, just enough to say, I'm here. And that was enough. No declarations, no demands, just presence. steady as the night blooming around us. I closed my eyes for a second, letting the quiet settle. Not lonely, just gentle, honest, telling me that this moment as it was mattered. Maybe that's what I'd been searching for all along. Not a perfect story, not a dramatic confession, just someone willing to stand next to me, breathing the same twilight, choosing, without needing to be told, that this softness was worth holding on to. And I think I chose it back.